in the beginning? Young Matty, you wouldn't have had a beard and been looking as resplendent and radiant as you do now. What was young Matty like? What did he do, and how did he end up doing what he's doing now?
Young Matty was always extroverted and pushing the boundaries and spent a lot of time grounded as a teenager.
Grounded, just to explain, a lot of our audience are into grounding, which is earthing.
I was into both.
Grounded as far as naughty kid, you should not have done that. You're not going to go and play with your mates this weekend. Got it?
Yes, but you can still find me at the local Woolworths even today with bare feet, and people look at me pretty strangely. But yeah, no, I grew up in the countryside of Victoria, Australia. Mum was a nurse, and a small enough town that I used to go to work with mum a lot. So I sort of developed this idea that I guess positive associations with medicine and hospitals and stuff like that, and spent a lot of time around, I guess, old, sick, lonely, dying people, which as a little kid, I knew no different other than that was just fun and exciting because there was heaps of people to talk to. And I was always as extroverted as I am now, basically.
An extrovert's dream, isn't it? Going to a hospital with lonely old people.
Yeah, it was great. And I learned so many fantastic skills and random bits of knowledge about the world. And I learned for everything from learning how to knit to playing pool to playing cards, and just, with all of these lonely old people that were just happy to have somebody visit them, But that really was kind of the foundation when I look back of my association with science and medicine being this amazing thing that really excited me. And I guess through my teenage years, I always played sport, sort of spent 9 years playing baseball, and then I spent about 7 or 8 years trying to be an elite swimmer, and was probably, this is the common piece of feedback through younger Matty's life is lots of potential and spending too much time having fun. But I got to state level and beyond, and climbed the ranks with that. Sort of spent a lot of high school smelling like chlorine, training 10 times a week. Going to country championships and Gippsland championships here in Victoria, and traveling around the country for multiple day meets. And bless my parents, were so committed to that and spent so much of their life, traipsing around the country to swim meets and competitions. So I guess on some level, I, sort of understand that almost elite athlete lifestyle of just life is all about, movement and training and getting better all of the time. And then at some point I got the opportunity to get into uni, and I would have been the first person in my entire family that had ever had that opportunity. And so growing up at a smallish country town, the idea was, let's go to university. It's not an opportunity that comes around very often. And my whole world kind of changed. I got into forensics. And as you mentioned the drummer thing too, I actually got into drumming at university, and I also got into forensics at the same time.
How? So my mother was devastated because I got into law. And I pulled out at the last minute and went and did sports science, which back then you were seen as maths in space. Everyone who did, If I had 3 red apples in one hand and I had 2 oranges in the other, how many apples? 5. I'm going to go do sports science. Now, I'm being facetious. So she was mortified. How did your parents help you make that decision between that? It's a big, big choice, right? Between drumming and forensics.
Yeah, I think I didn't even think twice, really. I concluded I can already drum. It was a very simple decision-making process. I was like, but I already play gigs and I already drum, and why would I go and do that at uni? I've already got that skill set. I didn't really understand it at the time, but I was like, whoa, forensics, I don't know anything about that, and if I choose drumming, it's not like I can learn forensics on the side,
I'll play a gig and then I'll go hang out in a morgue and look at some dead people and get the smell of formaldehyde off me. I can remember that from uni. So I've got to ask, I love pulling on a thread before we really get in, because I think it's going to help our audience understand you and where you come from as well. So the bright, bubbly, extroverted kid who's in the hospital with his mum talking to lonely people who, let's be honest, some of them are literally there dying. You then worked with people who had died. How did you, have you actually pulled on that thread and gone, how did that happen? Or was there a subconscious patterning, or am I just making this stuff up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wouldn't say that I've looked into that on a deep level, because I didn't necessarily get to the point the place that my day job took me wasn't necessarily morgues and dissecting bodies. There was a bit of that stuff, obviously, during university, but eventually I was sort of being a molecular biologist, I was dealing with cotton buds most of the time, like blood samples, all of these different bits and pieces, as opposed to dealing with death head on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, gotcha. But even the extrovert dealing with cotton buds, bit of a disconnect.
Okay, well, it's funny you say that because I always look back and think, who on earth coached me in my high school to apply for science? I'm so extroverted and social, and the amount of times that I used to like bust into the lab and be like, "What's going on, everybody? How was your weekend?" And I remember
you scared me out of a beaker.
Well, I got told off at one point. Somebody said, "Matty, stop asking me what I did on the weekend. I don't do anything." And I'd usually been like off a plane from Sydney, done a gig, like something really cool, just trying to live my double life. And yeah, so I was like, "Oh, this is being trapped inside, forced to read journal articles is not where I thrive."
Are you a polymath?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I know lots of stuff, but doesn't everybody?
You're a little bit different. So, are you still playing La Hazel? Is that the name of the band, or have you moved on?
Oh, that's a couple of years old, that band. Yeah, no, well, like one of the catches with lockdowns and living in Melbourne is that, that kind of killed a lot of the music scene at the time, and that was also the time where I decided to go just before that full time, leave the day job, leave the cancer hospital, and try the business thing. So I sort of had to make a mature decision to put all my energy into one thing. And so I still sort of get a call here and there, but I definitely miss it.
So molecular biology, looking at test tubes, then you worked in a hospital, and you really were upstream, downstream. Downstream is where you're trying to work with people who are sick to stop them from dying. Upstream is you're trying to stop them falling in the river. So it's more proactive, which is elite athletes. And we'll talk about that because a lot of elite athletes do overeat or have emotional eating, especially some of the challenges when they retire. So I want to give this to a few athletes I'm working with, Matty. So I have a goal with some of the content we want to talk about. So you obviously worked in the hospital, then you just got pissed and just went, God, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be more proactive. What happened? Was it just a blow-up moment, or was it the sort of tapping on the wall, tap, 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 and eventually it just caved in?
Yeah, well, there was a number of things, to be honest. I had sort of my first epiphany was that, so on Mondays every week, we would go to a mortality and morbidity conference or meeting, which is essentially a death audit. And so all the doctors get together and they talk about who had died in the previous week or month, and what decisions were made, what drugs were chosen, why we got here, how we could have possibly given more life to the person, which decisions could have been made differently. And after going to sort of six months of those, I started to just find this pattern in the way that everybody was talking about the way that people were essentially dying. And it wasn't necessarily that they had been overrun with cancer per se, but a lot of the conversations involved pharmaceutical toxicity as a cause of death and being over, like consuming so much chemotherapy or radiation. And I'm oversimplifying it for the sake of conversation, but the fact, and it was just an alarm bell that I'm like, so a lot of people, the biggest contributor or one of the major contributors is the medicine that's meant to heal them. And that was really the first thing that twigged in my brain as to like, hang on, is the medicine worse than the disease? And so this is me in my early 20s asking very naive questions, but that's what began it all, was that twig in my mind of like, hang on, I've been hearing this over and over and over every week. And there's heaps of other context. What are we doing about it?
And I can imagine your curiosity, and I feel like I know you through your podcast. So it's interesting, isn't it, these days? You actually meet someone, you come on, you go, oh yeah, but we've had a couple of chats, but I have learnt what you like. I've learnt what really annoys you. I've learnt you're quite contrarian. That must have rattled you though, when you're just going, hey, what are we doing about this? And what did people say when you asked that question as a bright-eyed, enthusiastic young fella? Hey, how can we fix this? What were you told?
I got to the point where I was getting frustrated with the idea that we were looking at these molecular SNPs, and these tiny little variations in this subset of people and this subset of people. And I eventually said to my professor, and I did it in kind of a cheeky way because I didn't, already knew the response I was going to get. I was like, what if they're both just fat? Like, and that was literally what I said. And, and then I went on to be like, what if they just eat McDonald's all the time, or et cetera? And my professor laughed and said, oh, Matty, if it was that simple, we would have figured out cancer years ago. But that wasn't enough to shut me up. I was like, I'm not convinced. And because then, as you mentioned earlier too, is like the data starts coming out about, the major precursor, the number one precursor to cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, MS, the list that goes on is now obesity, right? And so, which is really what led me to become a nutritionist and start doing all of these alternative studies, which then led me into alternative medicine.
Mm. And the facts, and correct me if the facts have changed, my understanding is 90 to 95% of a lot of these diseases are caused by poor nutrition and lifestyle choices. And then we think we just become this society that wants the pill, the potion, the bottle or the lotion. Hey, I've got inflammation, or I've got a hypersensitivity to insert. It just totally pisses me off, mate. You're going to wind me up on this as well. What about proactive lifestyle, teaching people? So I can imagine that discord that was causing for you.
Oh, absolutely. Keep in mind, though, I also had this, it took a while to really rattle my foundations and that's why I started the story there, is that little Matty developed this real belief and attachment to the hospital and medicine, and because of my upbringing. And so it took a while to convince myself, and there was also another sort of prong to the fork, if you like, which is that I had a 9-year relationship through my 20s, and she had just an awful experience with Western medicine, had a number of problems, and had 9 surgeries in the 9 years that we were together. And that kept making her sicker and sicker and sicker. And it wasn't until she kind of went on her own natural healing path, which involved, all sorts of out there stuff, energy medicine and energy healings, which is really emotional stuff. And then also Chinese medicine, acupuncture, all of these other things. And she almost completely reversed the diseases that she was told she would suffer with, for the rest of her life. And so I was having my own sort of inquisition into what I was doing at work, whilst she was also doing this at home. And it was like this sort of symbiotic coming together of sort of ideas.
9 years. Wow. So she got healthy and then got rid of you.
Well, I think we both got healthy and realized that the foundations of our relationship were not built on health.
Wizard's actually laughing. That's one of the jokes I've done in quite some time. I think that Wizard has given a positive response. Hey, that makes sense. It really makes sense. If you look at that family of origin with your mum in hospitals, it's just the environment you knew. You had a girlfriend, partner for 9 years. You're in that environment, and then suddenly, bang, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah. And so I think, the combination of my curiosity and wanting to look outside the box and not accepting, because fundamentally I'm a biologist and I carry the belief that nature doesn't make mistakes. And so my idea is, we're often taught that the body's doing this and the body's doing this, but we're never talking about why. We're not talking to patients about why. We're not talking to clients about why. We're just saying, this is how we can make it go away, at least for now.
Can you say that again? Fundamentally, you're a biologist.
Yeah, and I believe that nature does not make mistakes.
Ooh, that's going to be one of the outtakes on this podcast. I can already see it coming. So many of the diseases, so many of the malaise we've got is because we're stuffing up biology.
Yeah, exactly. And my view to sort of dig into that idea that nature doesn't make mistakes is that the consequence of whatever we're experiencing health-wise is nature trying to find the best, like trying to reroute around a problem. And so whatever the consequence to that is, be it cancer, one way to think about cancer is that it's an internal dumping ground because we haven't figured out a way to get rid of the shit out of our body, right? And so it creates this internal trash can, rubbish bin, if you like, and that's where it puts stuff. It just keeps putting stuff there because we can't get it out through, we're not going to the sauna enough, we're not going to the gym enough, we're not eating enough food, which naturally would detox the body. We're not sweating enough because we live sedentary lives that don't elevate our heart rate. Obviously we can keep going and going and going for all the things that the average person these days is not doing as a result of how society's set up. But nature is just trying to find its best way to survive in those situations.
We are kindred souls. We are brothers from another mother. I'm writing my next book at the moment. It's called Inside Job, that high performance is an inside job. It's from the inside out. There's another one I've got brewing sometime. I'm going to have a chat to you offline. The title of that book, The Big Biological Fuck Up.
Oh, juicy.
Oh, yeah, because titles with an F word in itself. So I'm serious. We might have a chat about that. I reckon we could pull something together, but let's get this podcast done first, huh? Loads and loads of different threads I can pull on, but let's summarize. You went down a path based on family conditioning, family influence, girlfriend, and then had an epiphany, went, I'm going to see the light, went and studied nutrition. Hey, I was also a nutritionist, and I say was. I think, was? I probably still am. So I studied exercise physiology, and then I went and upskilled. So I technically could call myself a nutritionist, but I haven't been on the tools for 15 years doing that. Although 2 days ago, at time of recording, I was in Fiji for a conference that I told my partner I did have to go there for 4 days, and I did do more than one keynote. I did 2 keynotes, morning wake up, a panel, and I also did a workshop on nutrition. So it was interesting getting back on the tools. And what I said in that is nutrition 101. Like I remember back to school, volume equals 4/3 pi r cubed. Give me the radius, I'll help you fill up a tank. That's not going to help me with energy levels or cognition or help me go through menopause if I'm a female, or testosterone levels. So nutrition is such a foundation. So there's loads of topics we could talk to you about. I'm going to stick to the script. Emotional eating. What is it? And then we can talk about what causes it.
Yeah, so the simple definition is that it's eating for any other reason than biological requirement.
Eating for any other reason than biological requirement. So biological requirement would be to get the right macronutrients, carbohydrates, protein, fat, and also the micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, enough to stay at homeostasis or a balanced weight.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So any other reason that would motivate you to eat outside of those things. And there are obviously psychosocial reasons, there are evolutionary reasons, there are situational reasons, there's celebration, there's commiseration, there's so many reasons that there are outside of our need to stay alive that would drive decisions about food.
And this is a real specialty in your practice and working with women. We're going to talk about men and women today. Why did you pick this topic to specialize in?
That is a good question. And it'll make sense as I explain it. But for me, it was that I believe my job working in a cancer hospital was to find the cause of disease. And that is not the model that I was employed in, as I saw it, I should add that. But basically for me, I sort of thought, okay, so if my own personal theory is that people that are overweight or struggling with what they're putting in their body is contributing to cancer and or insert disease, then I should become a nutritionist and help them with their weight. Fantastic. So I did all of these different courses and certifications and coaching stuff and became a nutritionist or a nutritional therapist and sort of help people do that. Talk to them about nutrition, weight, gut health, etc. And then found that people were still in the same situation. And what I found is that no matter who I spoke to, whether irrelevant of the disease type, irrelevant of the health status of their body, irrelevant if they've got genetics that really gain weight, because most of the Lansdown men in my family, still might not eat and drink amazingly, but they don't really gain weight. So their insides are still going to shit, but they're not showing it per se on the outside. But everyone that I spoke to, and I did conferences and retreats and all sorts of speaking stuff in multiple countries, I never talked to somebody that didn't know meat and veggies was a good idea. And one of the frustrations I have with this kind of industry is that we bang the education drum. People need to know more. People need more education, more science, do more research. I've never met anybody that needed more science. Ever. Meat and veggies. Sure, if we're talking athletes, high performers that are looking to optimize and biohack, different conversation. And sure, most people might know the exact diet macronutrient template that might be ideal for them, but I believe people can do upward of 50 to 70% of the work based on the knowledge they've got in their head. And so what that led me to in regard to this, find the cause of people's cancer was that, okay, so I got to the nutrition and they already know what to eat. And when I tell them what to eat, they don't really do it. And so that's what led me to the sort of the psychological aspect and the emotional eating was that, right, so the reason we've got the disease, and diabetes is probably the most obvious one, but, insert unhealthy situation is not because of necessarily we're putting in the wrong food. It's because my feelings lead me to eat the wrong food and ignore the right food.
I do want to discuss game changers, but I'm going to pause for 2 reasons. One is I know you're going to get really inflamed, not metabolically, emotionally, okay? The other one, I just want to keep going this thread. So let's hold that open loop. Can you feel your blood pressure go up? If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you can see you've actually got a little more of a hue of red. We'll get there. We'll keep people waiting. In researching this conversation, Matty, the Mayo Clinic defines emotional eating as a way to suppress or soothe negative emotions such as stress, anger, fear, boredom, sadness, and loneliness. Major life events, or more commonly, the hassles of daily life, can trigger negative emotions that lead to emotional eating and disrupt your weight loss efforts. Now, when I read that, I go, okay, Mayo Clinic, in your white jackets and all looking pristine, and the Mayo ads, they all have beautiful white teeth. Ding!
Yeah.
And it just looks like Days of Our Lives set. But that's pretty well everything. Stress, anger, fear, boredom. So I read that and I go, well, I may as well just emotionally eat, because Mayo Clinic said it's just a normal response to life. Is that where people are at now? They just think, oh, there's something going on, I'm going to eat, because that's the way of soothing, other than what you said, understanding some of the psychological mechanisms behind it and looking at our emotions and feelings and having an awareness of that and how to calm ourselves with breath work, or maybe with mindset, or from a biological approach, but we just go for the quick fix. That was a question and a couple of statements in one.
Yeah, that's all right. Well, at the start of that spiel you just gave there, you said that people think. And that's the big thing, is that most people don't. It's on autopilot. And probably some of the listeners of this kind of podcast, if we're talking about performance, are really aware of themselves or have done some psychological work or seen a therapist or whatever it might be. But most people don't realize that they're in this cycle. They might identify with the idea of stress eating, but they're more focused on the outcome, which is wine makes me feel better, right? Or, chocolate makes me feel better, rather than what's actually driving the decision to choose that food. And then they have these moments where they, out of the shower in front of a mirror and feel awful about themselves and get to the point where they just don't look at mirrors anymore, because it forces them to look at the other end of the conversation. But it's just, it is. It's so incredibly common. And I was at a presentation a couple of years ago from a sports psychologist. I think she was from the University of Cambridge, but I distinctly remember that she said that emotional eating in the UK can be contributed to $9.6 billion worth of the NHS fund, like how much it costs the system to work with, if we were to tie it back past food choice and go to the psychological drivers of the decisions to eat that food. And so I think, most people are not aware that that's what's going on. And that's specifically why I mostly work with people that are above the age of 50, because they need to have gone on the yo-yo diet roller coaster long enough to identify, I've got 30 years of data which says telling me what to eat doesn't work.
Three things. One, emotional eating includes alcohol. You're not just talking about food. So is the whole umbrella. Emotional eating is food and drink. Would you put drug abuse in there as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, fundamentally, we're trying to change our emotional state or our physical state. And so anything that we can do, put into the body or have an experience with, is going to change that state. So all of that would be under the umbrella of changing our state in order to produce an outcome that is no longer unpleasant. Because
performance intelligence, the definition of this podcast or the science behind it, is adapting your physical, your psychological and emotional state, obviously using natural levers and then positively impacting others. So as you were just saying that, I just went, it's not just food, it's a massive umbrella. So it's really any emotional response to anything that goes in the body. Got it. Two, over 50, that's really interesting. Is that because in your 20s you can eat, drink, take whatever you want and you bounce back the next day and go, I haven't slept, I've had a whole carton of VB. This is for your country mates and my country mates, or, I've had vodka Red Bulls all night and I feel fine. So in your 30s, 40s, you get a bit more life experience. But if you look at your average client, that's really interesting.
Yeah, well, I think as well, and I would say also it's a generational thing. And what I mean by generation is the last 2 or 3 generations that have been really exposed and hyper exposed to this instant gratification idea. And so we've got, teens, and I've worked with people in late teens, alongside their parents, and 20s and 30s. But I find that when we're getting teens and 20s, people want the bikini body tomorrow. They're willing to do the really hardcore stuff to fit into the wedding dress or to whatever outfit they're going to wear in 4 weeks' time. And then in 6 months' time, they're ringing me again, right? Because we're back where we started.
And number 3, so number 1 was we're talking about the big umbrella, it's emotional response. It's eating, it's alcohol, it's other substances. 2, reason why you have people over 50 that are at that stage, they've also got more cash. Okay.
Well, that's for sure.
Between you and I. And
yeah.
3, social media. I'm just thinking how much this has changed. How old were you when you got your first mobile phone?
Oh, I think I was 15, and it had Snake on it, which was still an awesome game.
15. Wiz, how old were you when you got your first mobile?
Probably around 12, 13.
12, 13? I've held off with my kids. I've waited until they're in year 7, which is about 12. I see some kids getting mobile phones now at 7 or 8, and there's calls. The Danish government released a study a couple of weeks ago saying they're going to look at introducing laws
I like this.
To ban mobiles until kids are 16.
I love that.
I got my first mobile at 21 years of age. As an adult, I do not have the self-regulation, even though I've got 2 degrees, and I teach mental skills, how to perform under pressure with some of the world's leading athletes. I do not have the willpower, the control to navigate my mobile phone when it overtakes dopamine, and you get into the whole mechanism behind that as well. How on earth is an 8 or a 9-year-old kid? So talking about this, and Matty, we could go from a 60-minute podcast to 6 hours on this topic alone, right? So my daughter, Michaela, just turned 16 last week. She got her L's whiz. Did I tell you that? Yeah, she you saw in the diary. So she put in I love this. So she knows how to work with me. Yeah, she's a very smart young woman. Made an appointment for me to 1, pick her up from school, 2, take her to roads and traffic. And we got her L's. Yeah? So she's got her L's. But Michaela also has been asked to model for a number of years. Stunning looking young girl. Gets it off her mother, who's got Danish background, obviously not her dad. And we've said no, because we didn't think she was at that stage where she could have an identity as a young woman evolving, and then also still be able to hold that modelling is just something you do. Whereas now I think she can actually do both, because I've seen her evolve. So she's going to start doing a little bit. But as a parent, I look at that with my kids, obviously with a lens and experience. But in society, I just wonder, Matty, how on earth can we win this battle around technology? And we know the Stanford behavioural scientists got in, and they went to Twitter and they went to Facebook, and there's some great shows you can watch about that as well. It's evil what they've done to take over our brains. How on earth do you, from your position, think we can fight that, or can we at least try and put the genie back in the bottle somehow, like the Danes are talking about doing?
Yeah, look, I would fully support that idea by the Danes. I'm the same, and before we hit record, we were discussing the fact that, you know, your phone was out of reach when we were talking before, and I also have had app blockers on all morning, because we have to surrender to the idea that we are humans and we have dopamine, and, you know, there's a way to hijack that system. The sugar industry does the same thing. The porn industry does the same thing. The social media industry does the same thing. And that's why, you know, people are addicted to these devices. And so, you know, I sort of bounce between personal empowerment and changing the system. And for me, like the app is changing my system. You know, I can't get into it. And I still might pick up my phone 10 times. And instead of getting sucked into a doom scroll, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's right. Like, and I use it in my workouts. And so I'm training myself over time to create more space between that dopamine hit, you know, or get the dopamine hit from my actual work. So I think it's a combination of the system needs to change, introducing new systems to your daily life and or government and or society, as well as the personal empowerment, because, you know, you need to want to change. You need to want better for yourself. Otherwise, every system will fail you.
Hear what you're saying, chap. You two banging on in your podcast. Your lives are so cool. You should tell everyone it is. I'm sitting here. I'm living out in insert suburb. I used to choose suburbs, and I had a few people message me and say, you can't use my suburb. Like, I grew up in Dubbo, New South Wales, and I've used a few Dubboisms. So hello to everyone in Dubbo. Lovely Dubbo. Aboriginal or Indigenous word for red earth. If you are looking at going on a holiday, go to Dubbo. Western Plains Zoo is amazing. Mum and Dad used to have a bed and breakfast there. There's also the old Dubbo Jail, which is in Macquarie Street. I could go on for hours. Probably can't. I've run out of tourism sites. I'm not going to use towns anymore. But a lot of people do listen to that and go, yeah, I get all that, champ, but I just feel shit. So let's go to the whole mechanism. Someone listening to this that is emotionally eating, what are some of the main reasons? Because to actually instigate any change, you've got to have self-awareness. So if you get a bit deep on psychology, self-regulation is knowing what to do. Self-awareness is actually being aware and having the knowledge around it. So let's raise the self-awareness first, and then we'll get to some of the regulation.
Yeah, so I actually think one of the first things, and it's interesting we have this conversation today because I had a new client start today and she was sort of feeling a bit shell-shocked in a way because of the lack of change that I had asked her to do. And she sort of talked about, she's on new diets over the years. On day one, it's like a huge day. You clear out the fridge, you change everything, you delete all your Uber Eats and all, like you fully go all in, right? And you only buy kale and you sign up to a yoga instructor course.
Namaste. Yeah, absolutely.
And so instead though, what I get people to do is just document. Like now we're introducing this awareness. So what do you eat? Don't change it. Don't change it. And sure, there's going to be a little bit of healthy user bias is that, oh, Matty's here. He's going to read this. I might, so things probably change a little bit. But the idea is like, what did I eat? What was I feeling? And what was the location or circumstance that I was in? And we need to compile that first because otherwise we've got no data to go on. All the data we're going on is memory. And even in nutrition studies, we rely on surveys, questionnaires, or memory. And that's really unreliable. Our memory is really unreliable. And so we need to collect data for the first week or couple of weeks or period of time so that we can actually say, oh, and ideally self-realize this when you're writing it down. Oh, I always eat chocolate at 3 p.m. when I have to have this meeting with that person I really don't like, or I need a bag of lollies or candy on my desk whenever I do this particular task. And we want to find those patterns first, because if we don't, then we're just sort of swinging in the wind, like we're swinging the bat in a dark room hoping that we hit the ball.
But where's the 6 steps? Where's the acronym? Where's the American accent? Where's the 21 days? It's not 6-minute abs, it's 7-minute abs. That's what sucks people in. And Instagram, I blame you because you have all these young men and women who look jacked and beautiful and they've got the boobs and the biceps and, hi, my name is Insert, and they got no freaking idea about anything to do with biology or science, and they've got no idea about anything to do with psychology or behavior change, but they've been blessed with a genetic stick. They look freaking awesome, and here's what I do this. I'm going to bang my head against the microphone, Matty. I love that you do that. I can also see that would create a little bit of conflict or a little bit of cognitive dissonance with people that they're going, well, no, I just want to get the fix. So
yeah.
How long do you hold that for, that space of self-awareness?
Well, I was going to say, having said that, obviously, they don't come in blind to that situation. They sort of talked about it before they join, and this is how we do things. We do things very differently. And, any of my marketing or content is that. So most people that come in, but still there's that feeling of like, oh, so I don't change anything? Not yet. But yeah, and the other thing that people realize in that phase, which is really common, is I don't know what I was feeling. Right? Because they've never spent time developing emotional literacy. They weren't raised in a home where emotional literacy was normal. They're not in a relationship where people are very, honest or understanding of their emotions or anybody else's emotions. And so one of the first steps for many people is, what is an emotion? What am I actually feeling?
So you're really raising that whole, it's a bio-psycho connectivity. You're not just a head on a stick. You're a body and your psychology and your environment. So it's a lot of education.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a brilliant app that we use as well, which is totally free to download, called How We Feel, available on all Apple and Android. It's incredibly simple to help people develop emotional literacy. It takes about 30 seconds. You can schedule it to ask you how you're feeling a couple of times a day. It sort of guides you through a little process. And so I get all of my clients to use that. It's sort of the emotion wheel, but in a really functional app, if you've ever seen the emotion wheel. And so I encourage anyone that's not sure or thinks they emotionally eat to use that when they eat, because it takes 30 seconds and you can just develop, and the data collection on the other side is amazing. And you can put in the locations you feel and the people that were involved or the circumstances, and then it's all color coded and lays it out in graphs. And it's a brilliant way to data collect your emotional eating or any emotional anything, to be honest.
What if you've been married for a long time and you're using How I Feel, and every time you go off and you feel negative emotions, you're with your partner or your family? Have you got a solution for that?
Difficult conversations have to happen.
But that would raise sometimes, wouldn't it? I mean, this environment and probably triggering with a relationship. Wiz, make a note of that. We'll put that in the show notes so people can download that. 4 or 5, I'm going to put you on the spot. What are the 4 or 5 clusters of groups you see that are more likely to have emotional eating? And can I go with one? We said the athlete or elite athlete, and we'll talk about 1 or 2 and then do the athlete. So 4 or 5 of the common groups.
Mums, and that's sort of generally who I work with most, is sort of women, and most of them are mothers, and that's just as a result of prioritizing everybody else their entire life and, you know, not prioritizing themselves at all. So we've got mums, we've got athletes or people that used to be on stage a long time ago that were really, really fit or really extremely healthy, or controlled is probably a better word, way back when. There's also, if we're talking about men, is that often with men, it can be less confident, sort of introverted type guys that are, you know, feeling all sorts of, and we can go into the psychology, but feeling all sorts of reasons to be introverted or sort of disconnected from society. And
You're talking about accountants?
Possibly, yes. Possibly.
Joke. I'm looking at the camera. Anyone who listens to this, a lot of people I work with at consulting firms love accountants. I've done a lot of work with accountants.
Yeah, likewise, obviously.
It was just a joke, just to bring some humour into a pretty serious topic. So we've got mums, athletes or performers. I wrote down on that. So that could be someone who is a thespian or an actor, and their body is a mechanism for their job, even though they don't have to hit a certain metric time, but the physicality is linked to their brand, their emotion.
Oh, one of the most challenging people I've ever worked with was a ballet dancer, for sure, like 20 years ago. And, you know, that is highly image-based.
I've worked with a few dancers as well. I've dated a couple of dancers in my younger years, Matty, and it is so tough. And I think that's an industry that is crying out for people like you to raise awareness, not just the women, but men in ballet as well, to hit a certain age, and then you just see a lot of problems after that. But we can't solve that today. Mums, athletes and performers, less confident introverted groups. You got 1 or 2 others?
Or definitely social media addicted teens and 20s. That's like eating disorders and emotional eating has gone through the roof in that category, which is no surprise. You know, once upon a time it was compare me to 30 other people in my classroom. Now it's compare me to 1 billion Instagram profiles, you know?
Less confident mums. If people want to know more about that, we do have a lot of mums listen to this as well. Let's put again in the show notes. It's great having a podcast. You can do all these off ramps as well. We'll put one of Matty's great podcasts around the work you do with mums.
Yeah,
I want to
good.
go on the less confident introvert. That's got me intrigued.
Yeah. So, well, I guess if we're talking about men particularly, often I would say that my experience is working with men is that they either were a younger brother, or they were the victim of bullying, or they were in a circumstance, whether it be work environment or life or whatever, that put them in a situation where they didn't feel confident or didn't have the ability to be dominant, or that wasn't modeled to them by the father in their home when they were much younger. And so these are people that, irrelevant of their level of success, you wouldn't know had these challenges, because generally speaking, men don't talk about this kind of stuff. But yeah, definitely the kind of guys that sort of make it into my world on that end of the spectrum of, you know, dealing with things silently, because either, and this is common for women too, being raised in a home where your feelings aren't important, you know, you're meant to be seen, not heard, that kind of thing. And then those guys might also have a very successful female partner. So there's a lot of attributes that can be attributed to that. But having said that, you know, we can find 10 reasons why every personality type emotionally eats, you know, but I think the introverted thing is really big too, because something that I guess not many people talk about is secret eating. Secret eating is a feature of every one of those groups that we just mentioned, is the idea that, you know, I hide my problems and nobody gets to see them. And in that is a lot of shame and embarrassment that is carried and, you know, thrust upon self. And then people do it and then do it again because they punish themselves and then they feel shameful for it. And so they're on this sort of never ending loop.
Well, there's a couple of things I need to reverse to track back, or as the Americans say, we'll double click on that one, Matty. Regardless of their level of success, I can't help but think as you were explaining that, so it's often a second child or a middle child, so they've got an older brother or sister, or they've had a parent that was emotionally disconnected, or they've been bullied. So there's been some sort of unease, minimum level, through to trauma at a higher level. I'm assuming a lot of those people then become highly successful, and I'll explain the definition of success from an extrinsic external point of view, more the Western world. There's a psychologist called Todd Kashdan, not Kardashian. Big difference in name, but also a big difference in credibility and science background. And Todd Kashdan talks about this difference between the good life and the goods life. Yeah? Good life, pleasure, meaning and purpose. The goods life, money, power, kudos. I believe you put an and in between those and then you can have both. So the introvert that you work with, are a lot of those focusing on that external success and rewards because they're missing something and they're chasing that extrinsic reward? I just got deep on you.
That's a good question. I would say, particularly for the men that come into my world, yes, highly successful. Business owners, executives, those types.
So I ask that to full transparency. A lot of our audience fit that category. High achievers would be whiz higher on the introvert scale. I did a session with Defense. It's a group that I can't talk about that I work with. It's sort of one of those groups, and highly intelligent. And I just realized from the start, I was even told that this group was high in the introversion scale. And so, I start the presentation, old shiny head up the front, got 150 people in the room, okay, asking them some questions. No hands went up. I went, okay, who hates audience participation? Everyone put their hand up. I went, sucked in, I gotcha. And we actually broke it down a little bit. But yeah, I would say that we would have a high proportion of introverts. Now, introversion on Carl Jung's definition of how you draw energy, I think it's really important we do a delineation or a description on that, because some people think an introvert incorrectly doesn't want to go and be with anybody else. I know a number of introverts who are really, really world-class speakers. So they can be on a stage and they're entertaining and ramping it up, but how they draw energy is solitude. Whereas extroversion, young Matty in the hospital, he's getting energy off all the old people who can't get out of their beds. So they've got no choice but to talk back to this young kid who's just chewing their ear off.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely an extrovert.
So I would say we would have a high percentage of introverts just because of some of the careers that I've worked in career groups, and we obviously promote the podcast. So yeah, that's why I found that really interesting as you're starting to talk about that.
To tack on the back of that idea of the introversion too, is that all humans have needs, and you can actually get your needs met via food without having to be around anybody. And so, that sort of pairs with the, normally, let's say 100 years ago, and for all of the time before that, unless you were wealthy, you had to go to the workplace to see everyone. You had to go get the food. You had to go do the stuff, Whereas now you can stay locked up in your house and work and eat and, feel or not feel all the emotions, or use food to create emotions without anybody witnessing you. So there's less embarrassment, less shame. And the catch is obviously that after years and years of that, it's visibly obvious in poor skin, in, being overweight, in disease diagnoses and stuff like that. But it matches the introversion really well because you can hide away from the world and do it.
We'll talk about the fix in a moment collectively. Let's talk about the athlete. I told you we could talk about this for ages. The time's just flying, right? I've already made a note of 2 future podcasts I want to do with you, mate. So the athlete, and I mentioned at the start, that was me. I thought you could outrun, outswim, outcycle, outlift, and I just would eat after a really big training session. You'd eat. I didn't even realize I was an emotional eater until I went through a marriage breakdown. And as I mentioned earlier, I was soothing through fast food, alcohol, and speed dating, and it was as a Band-Aid over a festering wound. And it took me 18 months, nearly 2 years, just to realize, hey, I got to go get this shiz sorted, stick my hand up as a guy and say, hey, I'm not okay. And as soon as I did that, like you said, raise self-awareness before you get to self-regulation. So talk to me about the science or the mechanism that you see behind a lot of high performers or elite athletes.
Yeah, so most of the people that I work with, it's after their success or after they have been successful, and they were so familiar with such a highly controlled environment that either 2 things are happening. One, the level of control that they're asserting over their food is no longer producing the same result, or 2, it's their rebellion. And that's a feature of everybody's emotional eating, is that it's their rebellion against the structure and the strictness and the training schedules. And, for a period of time, I lived with a couple of the strength and conditioning coaches from the Geelong Cats, the Aussie footy team. I remember the height of sort of Geelong Hawthorn going at it in the sort of 2000 and when it would have been about 2010, a couple of the Geelong players at my house, and one of them said, it's like prison. It's like being in a prison, being an elite athlete at the highest level in Australia in this team. And so I think, remembering that when I speak to these people that have been on stage and seeing that, this is their rebellion. This is their, I'm free. I can do whatever they want, whatever I want, and I can eat whatever I want. And I was so strict, and the food was delivered to my house or given to me. I was fed like a baby basically for 10 years as an elite athlete. And my whole life was controlled. So I think that's a really big feature of it as well. And so in both of those ideas, they can also happen simultaneously, which is then where we see this yo-yo of, hyper restriction and in the gym all the time, and then don't care for a month or two, and then eat whatever I want. And then we're back and forth between this part of our psychology that is rebelling. And there's probably a deeper level of that as well. It's like, are you rebelling against your mum or your dad from when you were 10, or the partner that you can't speak up to and tell her you're not happy, whatever it might be, versus but I watch all these videos on live, and on David Goggins says you got to be super controlled and don't give up, and then you swing back into that, and these ideas are competing.
Pain is just weakness living, and he runs along, and so I think David Goggins is a freak, and what he's done in different parts of defence is phenomenal. But there's one David Goggins, and then people watch that and go, I'm going to do that, I'm going to run, and David Goggins, come on, mate, just find some reality. And I'd love him to come out one day and say, hey, underscore n equals 1. This shit works for me. It's probably not going to work for many other people.
Oh, for sure. I saw a video recently on David Goggins where he's in the gym and he puts his leg up on the bench and he squeezes his shin and his calf. And takes his hand away, and his whole handprint stays in his leg. So sure, his mindset's incredible, but his body is degrading. He's got edema in his legs because he's not moving. He's broken so many bones, and so I wouldn't be surprised
edema
if he
is just
dies
bad
young.
fluid getting out, and you put new fluid in. I remember when I was on Apache helicopter.
Totally.
Now, there's a song that comes up, and we'll put it in on the overlay as well. I'm free to do what I want any old time. That's going to sound nothing like the song. We just put that in to put everyone out of their misery. Interesting you said Geelong Cats, because I thought of a quote, and you're in flow, and I was loving what you're telling us, and I didn't want to interrupt you, Matty. But Sam Newman, who was on the AFL footy show many years ago, and one of his other Geelong compatriots is a guy named Billy Brownless. And I remember when Billy Brownless retired, Sam Newman made a joke. He said, look at Billy. He said, most players retire, they eat a sheep. Billy's eaten the whole farm, because Billy Brownless put on 25 kilos. So it's really interesting. And I see that a lot with swimmers. I don't see it a lot with cyclists and endurance athletes because they're just addicted to the long endurance. I see it with a lot of team sport, a lot of cricketers. Some of my friends in cricket have retired and then they've eaten the whole farm.
Yeah. I saw it in swimming too. And actually, sadly, I recently went to the funeral of my coach who had been coaching for many, many, many years, or many decades, quite literally. And just catching up with all the people that we used to swim with. And there's a lot of people that are, severely overweight and obese, and combination of metabolism, lifestyle change. The modern life has a lot to answer for as well. But it was sad in a way to just see how far everybody had gone in the wrong direction.
I have worked with a number of Olympic swimmers and some household names, and I won't use their name, I don't have permission, and to get them back on track. And it really, it's aligned. I didn't realise how aligned we were. It's their whole identity had been around performance. So when I hit the times, I'm fueling ego and sponsors and coach and institutes that are sponsoring me, insert. They'd never had anyone like you or I, Matty, to bang the drums, not in your band, but to bang the drums metaphorically. And hey, you can have a purpose-based identity as well as a performance-based identity. And that's one of the things absolutely that drives me. I did a talk this morning at Manly Seagulls for all of our business partners. I was talking about that, and I just said, hey, look, my job's here to get us to win, and I'm not denying that. But between everyone in the room, friends, don't tell any of my athletes. My goal is to make the men and women I work with better people and adjust to life after. And I think if we start to do that, so people listening to this, and I got Matty on to talk about nutrition and emotional eating, and suddenly we're getting into feelings, and then we're getting really deep and talking about purpose. This stuff is all so interrelated. Is your next degree in psychology?
Maybe. I would love to do it. It's a long one, but yeah, I feel like if I've learned anything from conventional education, it's that the best and most useful things I've ever learned are outside of a university.
So there's a bunch of groups we're speaking about. There's one study I've heard you talk about in another podcast. I need you to tell our listeners, and then we'll get to the fix. What are your favourite chips? Crisps?
Either light and tangy or nacho cheese Doritos.
Nacho cheese. So anytime we have nacho cheese, I'll grab them off the kids and go, "Hey, nacho cheese!" And I run away. Did you? Okay, that's the response that they give me as well. Mexican Doritos are mine. Love them.
Yeah, Doritos.
And then I heard you talking about the Dorito effect.
Mm-hmm.
Please
it's an incredible
explain.
book.
This explains why when I was emotionally binge eating at my worst, when I was just so depressed after the marriage breakdown and thought I could fix it with fast food, I now understand the mechanism after listening to you why, like, mate, some nights I would have 2 bags, literally, of Doritos washed down with a 6-pack.
Yeah. Doritos are a particularly good example in this conversation, but the Dorito effect as a phrase is a phrase that's used by the flavor and food industry. It's essentially another version to explain the bliss point, which is what we see with food when companies, get sugar, fat, and salt, and sometimes caffeine at this sweet spot where it's just creates a perpetual loop of eating, because we just want more of that dopamine that we get as a result of it. Specifically on Doritos is that, they did a study years ago, which then, chip companies took on board. But the idea was that if you salt or flavor every 9th chip 5 times as much as every other chip, then you will create the same psychology that happens with pokie machines and gaming and gambling. And so you just keep going in because everybody likes to get that one that's absolutely covered in all of the extra salt, and you lather it up on your tongue and it's amazing. And, it's even in families, it's like a little celebration. Someone's like, "Oh, I've got the one that's covered in the stuff," and they found that frequency developed this psychology in people of like that addiction to gambling and playing the pokies.
So we know with pokies, it's the randomness. And one of my first jobs, Matty, when I was at the Tasmanian Institute of Sport, I was running the gym at the casino, Rest Point Hotel Casino. And every morning, on weekdays, I would be there 2 mornings a week. The crew did it every morning. I'd be there 2 days a week to supervise. I actually used to do a warm-up routine with the croupiers who would come in early before they started dealing out cards at around 10 or 11 a.m. And they would empty the pokie machines. And back then it was all coins. And they were so heavy because there were hundreds of thousands of dollars every night that they were getting a lot of soft tissue injuries. So I put a warm-up routine together. Crazy, huh? And then the injury rate went down 70%.
Wow.
So they kept me on, which was great. But they were lifting cold. And there was just so much money went through poker machines. So I got an early education that the house always wins.
Yeah.
And we know with gambling, it's the randomness. And linking back, I love how there's some open loops we can close. But when Stanford behavioral scientists went to Facebook and went to Instagram, they said, when someone puts up a post, don't put all the likes up straight away. Huh? No, we want everyone seeing they've got likes. No, you come back. And even that notion of pulling down is exactly like you do on the old poker machines with the handle. You pull out, oh, I've missed, bang. And you win. The randomness of winning keeps you going back, and they let you win just enough that you get hooked, but just enough that you then keep going and bigger and you lose, and the house always wins. So I found that fascinating listening to you.
Well, and the randomness comes simply from not knowing which chip you're going to pull out when you put your hand in the bag, right?
Did you know that, Wiz? You're a man of knowledge on food and
I'm going to go
booze.
buy a pack of Doritos after this. I'm going to put all the chips on the table and figure out which ones are the good ones.
All right. When we do a summary, we'll do that in a couple of weeks on this one, and we'll come back and get you to report. Is that still happening? Are they still making every 9th chip much
I'm
more
not sure if
salted and
that's
flavoured?
specifically happening, but there's no doubt that like conferences are happening all of the time, and science has been putting out by nutrition scientists that are continuing to give the food industry ways to addict people to their products, for sure.
Do you know why 9? What's the magic of the number 9 chips?
I think it just resulted in the frequency of people going back and back and back and increasing the sales of those chips, and the psychology that put in place for the behavior to always finish the bag as opposed to put it back in the cupboard and come back to it at a later date.
Yeah, when Wizard gets type 2 diabetes, and if he does the research properly and gets type 1 and starts taking insulin, it's your fault. Matty Lansdown,
sure.
because you told him to go and do an experiment on this. All right, give us, Wizard's not even smiling. He's going, yeah, I've got permission. But we've spoken about your background. Really interesting, isn't it? I love that sort of looking at the macro view, zooming out and looking at how it made you. It's got me to understand you a lot more today. Then we looked at what is emotional eating. And we looked at a number of different groups and why it happens, and especially social media is just going to make it even more challenging. Oh my God, I hope they bring in some of those rules around mobile phone. Because you think about it, right? It's with alcohol and cigarettes. It has to at some stage come in with mobile phones. We've spoken about those different groups. We spoke about athletes, we spoke about introverts, we spoke about mums, and we spoke about kids. We could have gone much deeper in each one of those. But now give us a fix. So people are listening to this going, oh, he's a really interesting guy, studied nutrition. Yeah, I'm an emotional eater. Yeah, I sort of get that I'm an ex-athlete, or I'm an introvert, or I'm a mum. How do you go about now helping people through this?
Yeah, great question. So there's two sides to it. One is the psychology, one is the nutrition. And the nutrition is equally as important, because a lot of people think, you get your emotional eating coaches that adjust that, and then you get your nutritionists that adjust, you just get the right nutrition and you'll be fine. But I really believe that we're all on that spectrum bouncing between the two. And so I think the first thing is if you identify as being an emotional eater, or you're a stress eater, or you find that when you're feeling lonely or sad or disconnected, you're on the couch with heaps of food, or like a copious amount of food, and you identify with that, then the first kind of step is to start documenting and analyzing what's going on, because you just want to collect data, like we sort of talked about before. Start checking in, like, what am I feeling? If you can't identify any emotions, How We Feel is the app. So start using that when you're when you're in situations with food. And then once you start identifying the feeling, or getting in the neighborhood of the feeling that you're trying to either suppress or experience, from there, what we need to do is we need to create a list of options that still produce that experience, because that emotion that you're experiencing still needs its outcome. It still needs to finish the loop. A lot of fad diets just say, be strong, resistance, willpower, you'll be fine. But what happens there is the emotion that you're suppressing doesn't finish the loop. So the alternative options that we have to create have to still allow that emotion to finish its loop of loneliness, of sadness, of nurture. Because if we don't, after willpower for a couple of weeks, we'll just end up back where we started, because we have just suppressed it for a couple of weeks instead of let it complete its experience. And then there's two ways to go from there. One is that you continue doing that, or two, that you then start actually processing, well, why am I always lonely at this time on a Saturday night with chocolate? And then we start setting up and changing life according to be able to solve that problem, which possibly opens up a bag of worms, a can of worms in a different direction of like, oh, why am I too scared to leave the house? And that could be because I'm not confident in the body that I'm in, and the dress that I wear doesn't fit anymore, and etc. And then there's the nutrition component, and that's that, modern food is incredibly devoid of protein. And there's been a group of evolutionary biologists that did a study on multiple species, all the way from, mammals down to locusts. And they found that every single species, every single animal they looked at, overeats carbohydrates to hit their protein quota. And so it's not until you get your protein needs met that you will find it much easier to not emotionally eat, or to not feel the pull towards any of that food, if you're actually getting enough protein and electrolytes, because you also want to feel satiated at the end of your meal. Whereas carbohydrates, doesn't matter how full you still feel the compulsion to continue. But we want to actually hit satiety so that your body says, okay, I'm done, which is exactly why it's very difficult for most of us to overeat a steak. You get to a point where you're just done. You can't put another bite in your mouth. You're like, oh.
500-gram tomahawk. Yeah, if you eat this, they have it everywhere around the world. You eat this, we'll give it to you for free. They know you're not going to eat it. right?
Exactly. That's why. But you could do twice as much in potato chips, or chocolate. You just keep going because we've got that, that mechanism that says keep going. There's not enough protein here. It's wired into our biology. So I think that's why it's really important to understand that it's the psychology and the emotions and the processing and the dealing with the stories and the narrative and the purpose. But equally, there's also this protein deficiency and a sort of electrolyte and micronutrient deficiency in the modern food landscape that means that we don't hit complete satiation. But once we start understanding that protein requirement a little better, and I'm talking generally for people that have, white Western backgrounds, because in my experience, people that have Sri Lankan, Indian, Caribbean, South American backgrounds do much better with less protein because historically they've lived on carbohydrates for a millennia. But, that's sort of getting into the specifics. But yeah, so that nutrition side is important and the psychology is important. And then it's kind of, I call it the two legs of the ladder, basically, because if you've ever tried to walk up a ladder with only one side to it, you're not going very far.
I like that. And I'm going to play that back to everyone and correct me if I've missed anything as well. But the steps to curbing your emotional eating, number one is start documenting and analysing your feelings. There's a great app called How I Feel to do that. Do that for a couple of weeks and just get a state of awareness before you even start to regulate. Two, you create a list of options. So you said you've got that sad loop. People need to close that because you still need to close that emotional loop. And then you can actually continue to control that, or you can process your feelings. Now, on that processing your feelings, that would then get into behaviour change, and we would start talking about keystone habits. Keystone habits is very similar to what they talk about, James Clear, with habit stacking. You stick the habits in with other habits. The keystone habits are the dominoes that break everything else. So it would be, what are your key habits that are going to set you up for success? And then step three, I love that bit. Rather than taking out, you're adding protein and electrolytes to hit that satiety.
Yep. That's sort of the basic framework.
1, 2, 3. Then where do you go from there?
Well, I guess you do some experiments, and with this list of our alternative options that we've created, we want to try that, and people feel really uncomfortable because they're about to do something they haven't done before, and it's like, oh, but the food fills the hole, or the chocolate makes me feel not lonely, and so it's just having a bit of bravery to traverse that gap. And my logic is with full permission to go back to the chocolate as soon as you're done. Right. And the reason for that is it creates this security blanket of I'm not like running away from my current identity. I can just be me, if I want to be. And so it's more like a try on this belief, try on this habit, but as soon as it's over, you can just go straight back to where you were before. And it just creates this idea of like, oh, okay, so I don't have to be, David Goggins or Matty or Andrew today. I can just like step out of the box and come back to me now. And it just creates this element of safety. And then we start practicing that. And I'm really big on not being all in or all out. I think that most people that use that idea, it's just an excuse for self-sabotage, right? Basically, because if anybody was all in, they'd never need help ever again. And so I choose to encourage people to go with this idea of all in or all out, moment to moment. Like the chocolate's in front of me. Am I going to go all in for the next 2 minutes and actually give this a real go and put it in the cupboard and try the new thing and then come back? And I tell the same people meal for meal. Don't say, this week I'm going to be super healthy. You don't know what you're going to feel in an hour, let alone in 5 days. It's like, which meal is next? Breakfast. All right. Let's do this. Let's use the tools for breakfast, because the rest of ever is a long time. And when we start using global language, that's intimidating and it's going to trigger a rebellion in you, or that's too much and it's overwhelming. And so we don't want to create that resistance to, whoa, forever is a long time. Forever without chocolate? No, it's the next hour.
It's very clever what you're doing, and you know what you're doing because you've experimented and you've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people. Because when it's black or white or dichotomous, I'm on a diet or I'm eating shit. When it's black or white or dichotomous, I'm healthy or I'm unfit and I look in the mirror and I feel fat and depressed and everything. So you're actually taking that dichotomous, good, bad, amazing, terrible, hot, not hot, away from them. And I know when you do that, your success rate is much, much higher. It's also got a real mindful-based approach. So how did you stumble upon that? Did someone teach you that? Did you just learn that?
Oh, it's a good question. So interestingly, a lot of the way that I talk about things is a result of my own many years in therapy. And this probably should have been a part of the story at the beginning, but I, just had an incredibly violent childhood, which created a version of me as an adult, which was not violent, but very much running away from darkness and bad feelings. And I emotionally ate a lot. I didn't know what was going on at the time. And it wasn't until that partner that I referred to earlier in my 20s sort of said, "Hey, I don't think your childhood was, amazing." And I was like, "What do you mean? It was just discipline." And then had pieced it all together. And so a lot of it's my own therapy, but I also studied, to become a, emotional eating and binge eating disorder specialist and a bunch of other things as well. And that's very CBT, logic-based ideas. But my experience is that logic and emotions aren't always friends. And so it's a combination of logical education with lived experience. But I don't really build my business or my podcast or anything off my personal story, because I've just met so many different people that have so many different stories. And so I'm more like, I could help, but irrelevant of the story. It doesn't have to look like mine.
In media, Matt, they would maybe say that is called burying the lead. When you are having a real authentic conversation, I like that you've just sort of gone, oh, by the way, this is how I grew up. So I appreciate you telling us that, because I'm sure there's a lot of people here who have had violence or have had a really tough upbringing that haven't had the awareness, the support. There must have been one or two people along the way who really helped you as well to get confidence back. And so violent, obviously, it was in your immediate household. That's where the violence was.
Yes. And things have changed and, since then, and a lot of people have grown and healed, and everyone was doing the best they could at the time. But the consequence of that is just the way that I showed up in intimate relationships. And I was always the happy, bubbly kid, even in the chaos. And the problem in my 20s and my late teens was that in order to stay that person, I ate. To hide the darkness, to hide the depression, to hide the anger, the rage. And I would literally get numb out. I would like an alcoholic drinks too much to just be kind of unconscious. I would eat like that. And I did it for many years until somebody said, my partner at the time said, "Do you think like you emotionally eat?" And I was like, "What? I'm a man." I'm like all of 22 at this point. Like, I don't eat my emotions. I don't have emotions. What are emotions? And it took me about 7 years of therapy and all sorts of different journeys and experimentation with alternative medicines and different things to sort of piece together, I guess, the work that I do now. But I'm so grateful for the whole story now, because I would never have gotten to a place where I can help so many people had I not have been on that journey myself.
Do you tell when it's appropriate, or you feel it's appropriate, do you tell clients that background to lean into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one thing even that I've experienced with seeing psychologists and therapists myself, is that unless they share some of who they are, they're just a stranger that I'm talking to. And I don't personally really vibe with that. And so my experience is that, when it's relevant, I bring my experience and my story into it, because it helps a lot of people feel understood. And that, this isn't just some guy that went to university and is just regurgitating information. There's some lived experience. And that's why I made the comment before that a lot of my learning comes outside of universities. Don't get me wrong, all the conventional education comes in incredibly handy. But most of my learning is through struggle and, trying to figure it out, try and build a life that I can be proud of as a man rather than a broken boy.
When I asked that question, how did you learn that? Because it's not dichotomous. I didn't know we'd unravel what you've just told me. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this who just go, it is so candid, so refreshing to hear someone say, hey, my life's been pretty shitty. There were some really dark times. And I won't go into any more, mate. People can obviously just work out how hard that would have been for you. And then to actually acknowledge that, and I could just see how you build so much rapport with other people, because it's not just the science, it's the lived experience as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I guess I'm just so aware too that social media is very much full of people telling their own story, and for whatever reason, that might be good, that might be bad, but for me, I didn't want it to be centered around Matty's story, I wanted to be able to help people on their journey with their story. And I'm a human. I've had experiences. We all have had bad times. And, I'm also not naive in that, there's plenty of people that are worse off. And, I'm also not gaslighting myself by saying that, because I've focused on it and worked on it, and it's affected me in ways that were problematic to my life. And so I wanted to change that. And so the people that come towards me, I guess, resonate with the idea of wanting to change that for themselves because they want better things in their life. They're no longer accepting what they've accepted. And that comes in all forms. You know, through my programs, I've had people quit careers that they've hated, end marriages that they've hated, get married because they're finally willing to step up, like so many other ways that this plays out. And I really believe in the idea of like how we do anything is how we do everything. So whether we're talking about the psychology of food, it doesn't matter because your brain controls every aspect of your life, that your sleep, your stress, your relationships, your career, your everything. So once we shift one aspect of your mind, it starts to just naturally fall over and domino into every other aspect of your life.
Have you got a branding problem?
A little bit at the minute.
Oh, I ask seriously. You're not a nutritionist. Just as you go through all that, that's much more than food and nutrition. It's mega. Nutrition and food is one of the mechanisms, but even in talking to you, it's one part. It's psychology, it's self-awareness, it's physiology. I ask that being playful, but to me, it's much more than just nutrition, what you're doing. But do you sell it as more than nutrition now? Is that part of your evolution, stepping up to that next rung? And then I'm asking, there's a lens that I go back to when I was in my first few businesses as well. I was exercise physiologist, personal trainer, doing nutrition. Then when I started to say I was doing corporate and a bit of productivity, people would start paying a couple of thousand rather than 500. And then when I realized it's around psychology, and then you get into leadership and culture, suddenly it's not a budget, it's a problem they need to fix, otherwise they're going to lose their job. So I actually asked that part, sort of teasing out, but just serious. I see, I hear, I feel that you're doing a lot more than nutrition.
Yes. And regularly on group coaching calls or one-on-one calls, the food is very rarely talked about. And we sort of come back and forth to that. And there's heaps of the nutrition stuff in what I do. But I guess the main part of my marketing is, emotional binge and overeating or poor relationships with food and body image is sort of the lens that it's sort of put out to the world with mostly. And then sort of the next layer of marketing might be we're going to do psychology and food, and somewhere in there is like all of the other things, gut health, energy, libido, and fundamentally purpose and life direction.
Libido, he's been talking for an hour and we're suddenly getting onto hard-ons. I'm listening. Hey, Kelly, turn the TV down. I need to hear this. That's one of the other podcasts I would like to do, not just talking about hard-ons, but talking about testosterone and men and keeping all that going. I have an open loop and then I want to give the details. We'll put them in the show notes, but I absolutely want to give your details. I will be gobsmacked if people don't reach out and ask you to work with them, just with your level of knowledge, rapport, but also sharing your story and just that humility that has come through. So to change gears a little bit, game changers. How many people did we see, Wiz? How many people did I have in presentations go, I watch Game Changers and now I've just become a vegetarian? And I'm like, how much? You must have heard that so much in your line of work.
Well, yes and no. So I guess the podcast has been doing relatively well for about 5 years. And so my world is full of like-minded people at this point, so I'm aware that there's a bit of confirmation bias in my world. But yes, I did have people say that they went vegan as a result of the Game Changers, and I guess the more recent one was that health experiment that they did with the twins as well.
So for anyone who's not familiar, Game Changers #1, they had a bunch of people like Arnold Schwarzenegger. They found an Australian 400-metre runner who made the Olympics who is a vegetarian. They basically handpicked a lot of people who only eat plants, which you can, if you want to get a sample group and create a story, you can do that about a lot of things. Now, the message I did like about that, was, hey, eat more veggies. Yeah, and then Game Changers Part 2, they got twins where possible, or they got, it was twins, wasn't it? And then they gave them 2 different lifestyles.
Yes, they split them into a vegan group and an omnivore group, and were comparing the results. But there was a lot of irrelevant of the fact that it was vegan, there was just a lot of issues with the study. There was not enough time points. The study didn't talk about what was actually in the omnivore group, in the nutrition for the omnivore group. They were trying to display that choosing a vegan diet was better on your cardiovascular markers and your weight loss markers. And the way that they presented it on Netflix was, obviously with all this beautiful B-roll and all of these incredible scientists that look so amazing and that they run these institutes that are incredible. But if you actually actually read the study, it's very underwhelming. And in some cases, the vegans lost muscle mass. And if you lose muscle mass in 8 weeks because of a dietary change, that's really concerning. Your muscle is not only useful for looking good and lifting at the gym, but as you get older, it's an endocrine organ. You know, it manages your hormone profile in a really important way, particularly for women going through menopause.
And you are so much more metabolically active. That's why I can't tell you how many men over the past decade or two that have come to me and they've gone, oh, look, I'm running all the time and I'm cycling, but I just can't lose weight. All right, cycle half, cycle a quarter, do hills, get your heart rate up, run up hills, go and lift weights. They come back and they suddenly start to look jacked and they say, I'm waking up with a kickstand. What's going on? Well, what have you done to me? It's like, well, you've got some muscle and you're metabolically active and your body's working as it should.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess the other thing to add to that is, especially with those men that can't lose their beer belly or can't shift that weight, is that just the modern world is so stressful. There's a perpetual cycle of cortisol going on for these men and women, to be honest, for everybody. And, it wasn't that many generations ago that life wasn't that stressful. There was times where it was extremely stressful, but we would go back to baseline, just like the buffalo that gets chased by a lion. Ultimate stress response, an hour later, back in the herd, grazing grass, no stress at all. Whereas now we go back to our baseline of stress, rather than back to calm, cool, and collected. So I think that's got a lot to answer for metabolic dysfunction and like weight loss resistance stuff as well.
So the cliff notes, the bullet points, one of the world's leading nutritionists, Matty Lansdown, has said, yes, eating meat, lean meat, is part of a healthy, balanced diet as long as you have a lot more veggies on the plate than the meat.
Well, something like that. Depends on the individual. Yeah. Personally, most of my diet's meat. I would say 70% of my meals are meat. And
70%?
Yeah.
Okay. We need to do another. We're going to do another podcast. Yeah. Macronutrients. Let's flip it on its head.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. But yeah, a healthy amount of meat, good amount of veggies, all that stuff's good for you.
God, you've got all the introverts listening to this just really excited now. The introvert males, successful males who can go and buy a cow for dinner every night because the prices are through the roof. I've really enjoyed the conversation today.
Me too. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate you.
Is there anything we didn't cover? Is there anything you want to reflect on, or is there anything you want to ask me before we wrap up?
No, I think we could talk for hours, like you said before, on all sorts of different things. But the big thing that I want to leave people with really is just, it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. And as much as it's government's responsibility and as much as it's the supermarket layouts and the subsidies for farmers, and I believe the system is rigged against us for sugar, terrible food choices. But the only way that we can influence the system is to be personally empowered enough to spend our money in the right places to slowly, over the next years or decades, change the system. And so, it's not. I honestly believe that it's not most people's fault. This system is rigged against us. But it's listening to podcasts like this and continuing to change the people around you and the information that comes into your space that leads to personal empowerment and then finally change.
Podcasts like this, Performance Intelligence, an awesome podcast as well, like How to Not Get Sick and Die. I love the creativity of that. I pretty well know what I'm going to get. So go to your favourite podcast app and download How to Not Get Sick and Die, and you can get a lot more of Matty. For people who want to buy you, do your courses or programs, catch up with you, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
Yeah, just through the website, basically. So that's just mattylansdown.com. So just go to the contact page, shoot me an email, and we can begin chatting.
Now, in this day and age, Matty can be spelled M-A-T-I. Lansdown could have an E or a W, so we'll go it word for word, www.matty, M-A-T-T-Y, Lansdown, Lansdown.com. No
Perfect.
A-U, mattylansdown.com.
Yep, that's the one.
Mate, thank you for today.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much.